Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Billy and I love autism. I am neurodivergent and my husband is diagnosed autistic, but this video is less about that and more about how autistic people approach online communication. I'm making this video as part of a project for my Human Communication in the Digital Age course at IUPUI. I've also made this accompanying website, which you can check out to get a bunch more info and resources. As a quick disclaimer before we jump in, I'm going to be using identity first language because being autistic is a core aspect of a person's identity to be recognized, validated, and appreciated. As explained by Lydia Brown at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN, person first language implies that autism is detrimental to value and worth as a person, which is why we separate the condition with the word with or has. I'd also like to define a few terms before we jump in. The Neurodiversity Hub offers this definition of neurodivergent, a word I'll be using a lot throughout this video. Although there is broad diversity across the population, some individuals have neurological variations that make it particularly challenging for their communication, self-expression, and interaction with others. Neurodiversity is a broad umbrella and is not just autism. Neurological variations can include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and tics. However, Judy Singer, who coined the term, proposes that we are all neurodiverse because no two humans on this planet are exactly the same. I would loosely define neurotypical as anyone who is not neurodivergent. To define autism, I love how ASAN describes being autistic. This is a long quote, but bear with me. Autism is a developmental disability that affects how we experience the world around us. Autistic people are an important part of the world. Autism is a normal part of life and makes us who we are. Autism has always existed. Autistic people are born autistic and we will be autistic our whole lives. Autism can be diagnosed by a doctor, but you can be autistic even if you don't have a formal diagnosis. Because of myths about autism, it can be harder for autistic adults, autistic girls, and autistic people of color to get a diagnosis. But anyone can be autistic regardless of race, gender, or age. Autistic people are in every community, and we always have been. Autistic people are people of color. Autistic people are immigrants. Autistic people are a part of every religion, every income level, and every age group. Autistic people are women. Autistic people are queer. Autistic people are trans. Autistic people are often many of these things at once. The communities we are a part of and the ways we are treated shape what autism is like for us. There is no one way to be autistic. Some autistic people can speak, and some autistic people need to communicate in other ways. Some autistic people also have intellectual disabilities, and some autistic people don't. Some autistic people need a lot of help with their day-to-day lives, and some autistic people only need a little help. All of these people are autistic because there is no right or wrong way to be autistic. All of us experience autism differently, but we all contribute to the world in meaningful ways. We all deserve understanding and acceptance. Every autistic person experiences autism differently, but there are some things that many of us have in common. Number one, we think differently. We may have strong interests in things other people don't understand or seem to care about. We might be great problem solvers or pay close attention to detail. It might take us longer to think about things. We might have trouble with executive functioning, like figuring out how to start and finish a task, moving on to a new task, or making decisions. Routines are important for many autistic people. It can be hard for us to deal with surprises or unexpected changes. When we get overwhelmed, we might not be able to process our thoughts, feelings, and surroundings, which can make us lose control of our body. Number two, we process our senses differently. We might be extra sensitive to things like bright colors or loud sounds. We might have trouble understanding what we hear or what our senses tell us. We might not notice if we are in pain or hungry. We might do the same movement over and over again. This is called stimming, and it helps us regulate our senses. For example, we might rock back and forth, play with our hands, or hum. Number three, we move differently. We might have trouble with fine motor skills or coordination. It can feel like our minds and bodies are disconnected. It can be hard for us to start or stop moving. Speech can be extra hard because it requires a lot of coordination. We might not be able to control how loud our voices are, or we might not be able to speak at all, even though we can understand what other people say. Number four, we communicate differently. We might talk using echolalia, which is repeating things we have heard before, or by scripting out what we want to say, which is what I'm doing right now. Some autistic people use augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, to communicate. For example, we may communicate by typing on a computer, spelling on a letterboard, or pointing to pictures on an iPad. Some people may also communicate with the behavior or the way that they act. Not every autistic people can talk, but we all have important things to say. Number 5, we socialize differently. Some of us might not understand or follow social rules that non-autistic people made up. We might be more direct than other people. Eye contact might make us uncomfortable. We might have a hard time controlling our body language or facial expressions, which can confuse non-autistic people or make it hard to socialize. Some of us might not be able to guess how people feel. This doesn't mean we don't care how people feel. We just need people to tell us how they feel so we don't have to guess. Some autistic people are extra sensitive to other people's feelings. We might need help with daily living. It can take a lot of energy to live in a society built for non-autistic people. We might not have the energy to do some things in our daily lives. Or parts of being autistic can make doing those things too hard. We may need help with things like cooking, doing our jobs, or going out. We might be able to do things on our own sometimes, but need help other times. We might need to take more breaks so we can recover our energy. Not every autistic person will relate to all of these things. There are lots of different ways to be autistic, and that is okay. Autism affects how we think, how we communicate, and how we interact with the world. Autistic people are different than non-autistic people, and that's okay. A fitting metaphor is that autism is a different operating system a person runs on. I love how, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced this name, I believe it's Jack Den Houting phrased it in their TED Talk. The neurodiversity paradigm is an alternative way of thinking about autism. It describes autism as part of the range of natural variation in human neurological development. At its very simplest, autism is a different way of thinking. Just like biodiversity helps create a healthy and sustainable physical environment, neurodiversity can help to create a healthy and sustainable cognitive environment. According to the neurodiversity paradigm, there are no right or wrong brains. All forms of neurological development are equally valid and equally valuable. And regardless of what type of brain you've got, all people are entitled to full and equal human rights and to be treated with dignity and respect. It's important to note that while autism is labeled as a disorder, meaning it's officially called Autism Spectrum Disorder or ASD, it is not a harmful or negative or a bad way to be. This is a great time to introduce the social model of disability with this clip from the same TED Talk by Den Houting.
Well, maybe you can't tell just by looking at me, but I'm disabled too. I'm not disabled by my autism, though. I'm disabled by my environment. This is another paradigm shift. The way that we're used to thinking about disability is based in a model called the medical model of disability. The medical model assumes that disability is an individual problem. It places disability within the disabled person, within me. For example, I really struggle with shopping malls. They're loud, they're brightly lit, they're unpredictable, they're full of people. The medical model would say that I struggle with shopping malls because there's a problem with the way that my brain processes that input, because I'm autistic. But there's another way to think about disability. It's called the social model of disability. In the social model, disability happens when a person's environment doesn't cater for their individual characteristics. In the social model, we don't refer to people with a disability. Disability isn't something that I carry around like luggage. Instead, we use the word disabled as a verb. Disability is something that's being done to me. I'm actively being disabled by the society around me. When I go to a shopping mall, I don't struggle because there's something wrong with me. I struggle because the shopping mall is designed in a way that doesn't cater to my needs. If we started designing shopping malls that were quiet, dimly lit, predictable, and sparsely populated, well, I'd still be autistic, but I might not be disabled by shopping malls anymore.
Before examining how an autistic person's communication has changed in the digital space, let's discuss what face-to-face communication can look like. There are many ways a neurodivergent person can communicate, and there are a wide range of factors that impact their communication. Some autistic people experience apraxia, which is a motor speech disorder that makes it difficult to speak. Some autistic people experience catatonia, or a psychomotor disorder involving the connection between mental function and movement. Sometimes autistics can experience mutism, which is simply defined as the inability to speak, and can result when an autistic person is distressed for a variety of reasons. Many times it's brought on by sensory overload, which is something I personally experience often if I don't have the accommodations that I need. An autistic person's abilities can change day to day, context by context. Personally, in some situations, I'm capable of being very sociable, behaving in high energy ways, and my brain cooperates with me and lets me keep going, even without a script. Other times, simply speaking requires too much energy. My husband is the same way in that regard. This is called selective mutism and is common among neurodiverse individuals. Speech is far from the only way to exchange ideas, and many autistic people use augmentative and alternative communication, AAC, which was mentioned briefly in the ASAN quote I read earlier. According to the American Speech Language Hearing Association, there are a lot of different types of AAC. No-tech and low-tech options include things like gestures and facial expressions, writing, drawing, spelling words by pointing to letters, and pointing to photos, pictures, or written words. High-tech options include things like using an app on an iPad or a tablet to communicate and using a computer with a voice, sometimes called a speech-generating device. An AssistiveWare article on different communication methods put it this way: gestures, vocalizations, facial expressions, manual sign language, letterboards, photos, social media, formal AAC systems, including speech-generating devices and light-tech or paper-based communication books, and typed or handwritten language. These are all modes of communication. There are many AAC systems that can be used in face-to-face and online interactions. Many of these ways to communicate are transformative in the lives of nonverbal autistic people and their ability to express themselves easier, to be heard, and to be understood. When scientists much smarter than I look at the patterns of communication between autistics and non-autistics, they found an interesting phenomenon called the double empathy problem. As Dr. Damian Milton put it in an article published on the UK National Autistic Society website. According to the theory of the double empathy problem, communication issues are not due to autistic cognition alone, but a breakdown in reciprocity and mutual understanding that can happen between people with very differing ways of experiencing the world. If one has ever experienced a conversation with someone who one does not share a first language with, or even an interest in the topic of conversation, one may experience something similar, albeit probably briefly. In other words,
in 2012, an autistic researcher named Dr. Damian Milton proposed a new theory. He called it the double empathy problem. And what he suggested was this: maybe autistic people don't actually have social deficits. Maybe we just get along better with other people who think like us. Maybe autistic people socialize better with other autistic people, and non-autistic people socialize better with other non-autistic people. Maybe the difficulties that we see when autistic and non-autistic people try to socialize aren't because the autistic person has social deficits, but because autistic and non-autistic people are both bad at communicating in ways that make sense to the other.
The problem is the mismatch in communication styles. When I first learned neurodivergent people communicate much more effectively with other neurodivergent people, it made all the more sense why my husband and I understand each other and communicate so well. Like, duh. Some facets of communication that are regarded as crucial to neurotypicals are not considered so by neurodivergent people. Take a quick break with me to walk through this anecdote. For my human communication in the digital age class, I was listening to an interview with Dr. Sherry Turkle, author and social studies professor at MIT. Dr. Turkle mentioned the value of eye contact in cultivating empathy and connection in communication. And while this is very true for people with neurotypical brains, eye contact has the inverse effect on many autistic people. It's more invasive and off-putting at varying levels of intensity. When I brought up my thoughts to my husband, who had been listening in on the interview from his computer desk, he laughed and said that he had literally just been stressing about how to make eye contact with the waiter at the restaurant we were going to with friends the next day. Overall, there is no best way to communicate. There are just diverse people with diverse preferences. What is disarming and comforting to some is a source of severe anxiety and perturbance in others. Now, there is a phenomenon I'd like to discuss that I wasn't sure where to put, but I think it might fit here because to me it happens when I'm trying to suppress my natural behavior and emulate other people's communication styles. The phenomenon I'm describing is masking. Healthline offers this definition. Masking, which is also called camouflaging or compensating, is a social survival strategy. How it looks will vary from person to person, but masking can include behaviors like these: forcing or faking eye contact during conversations, imitating smiles and other facial expressions, mimicking gestures, hiding or minimizing personal interests, developing a repertoire of rehearsed responses to questions, scripting conversations, pushing through intense sensory discomfort, including loud noises, disguising stimming behaviors, like hiding a jiggling foot or trading a preferred movement for one that's less obvious. Unfortunately, many people are forced to mask and to pretend to be what is expected of them instead of what they are. We live in an ableist society that is not set up with neurodiverse needs in mind, and there are countless environments in which a neurodivergent person may not feel comfortable being themselves and masks instead. Again from Healthline, people may mask autism for a variety of reasons, such as feeling safe and avoiding stigma, avoiding mistreatment or bullying, succeeding at work, attracting a romantic partner, making friends and other social connections, or fitting in or feeling a sense of belonging. In his TED Talk entitled "What It's Really Like to Have Autism," Ethan Lissy stated, "Some people think that because of our ability to mask that this is the cure to autism. However, all it really does is makes us ashamed of showing our true selves." And that's exactly it. Also, there is no cure or a need for a cure for autism. That's called eugenics, trying to wipe out people with qualities you arbitrarily and bigotedly deem as undesirable. Masking is essentially a trauma response to not being accepted and has a multitude of adverse effects. Allow me to quote the Healthline article once more. Masking may be common in places where there's little support for neurodiverse people, or where people on the autism spectrum are under direct threat. But while camouflaging may have certain benefits, it's important to know that there are significant costs. Time spent learning neurotypical behaviors is not time invested in other kinds of personal development, and the effort used to copy neurotypical interaction can quickly lead to social overload. Here are some of the effects of regular masking. Stress and anxiety. In a 2019 study, researchers found that stress and anxiety were higher in people who routinely masked autistic traits, compared to those who used masking less often. Depression. In 2018, researchers interviewed 111 autistic adults, finding that those who reported camouflaging their autistic traits had symptoms of depression and felt unaccepted by people in their social sphere. Exhaustion. Masking consumes huge amounts of energy. In a 2016 study, women who used masking to satisfy neurotypical standards said they felt exhausted by the constant effort. Delayed identification of autism. Some people are so successful with masking that their autism isn't identified until they're much older. That delay can lead to mental health issues because people don't get the support or understanding they need. In my life, my husband wasn't diagnosed until adulthood because he masked constantly. Loss of identity. Some people who mask their identity, interests, and traits end up feeling like they no longer know who they really are. Some have said masking feels like self-betrayal. Others have said masking makes them feel like they're deceiving other people. Risk of autistic burnout. When people push themselves to behave in ways that don't feel authentic, the result can be an overwhelming feeling of overload, sometimes called autistic burnout. Masking may require an extended period of quiet withdrawal and recovery. Increased risk of suicidal thoughts. In a recent study, prolonged camouflaging was linked to lifetime suicidality. The study was relatively small, with 160 students, and involved primarily women, with 89.6% being women. However, it showed that camouflaging led to feeling like a burden, which in turn led to more suicidal thoughts over the course of a lifetime. Unmasking, however, is still a privilege, in that it requires a safe environment, accepting of authentically autistic people. I'd like to read from a blog post by autistic artist Sonia, who phrased the sentiment eloquently and empoweringly. In writing this, I realized that so much of the anxiety of unmasking is in the reception we receive. And that's the bit we fear most because it can be so dangerous or humiliating for us, and that is unpredictable. So privileged am I at unmasking today that I often forget the deep, deep root of my social conditioning in the playgrounds and playing fields of school. I forget that for many autistics, especially where other minority statuses intersect, unmasking is unsafe and is not an option. If we wobble in our resolve, it won't be through cowardice. If we choose to mask in specific situations, there will be no judgment at all. So, we've discussed different ways to communicate as an autistic person. Let's dive into the meat of the matter. How does being neurodivergent, and specifically autistic, impact the way you communicate using technology? For some autistic people, digital communication is a life changer. For instance, technology can open so many new venues for communication for nonverbal autistics, people with mutism, or people with selective mutism. I'd like to share what YouTuber Catatonia, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, had to say about using AAC as an autistic person.
I usually use typing, and then if I want, the device reads what I typed. But why would I use something like this if I can just speak? Isn't this more work? The answer is that it is a trade-off. It is not more work to me, especially on a keyboard where I can type very fast. It does sometimes take a while, but it is worth it to me because if I type, then I can say exactly what I wanted to say. That is not always possible using verbal communication. I am autistic, but I also have anxiety and sensory processing disorder. If I am overwhelmed by either of those, then it is very hard to communicate verbally, or maybe even impossible. When I was young and undiagnosed, I had no idea why that was the case. I realized that if I tried to talk in that state, it would not work and it would end badly, so I made sure I didn't talk in those times. When you are 5 or 10, that is fine, but once you get too old, you can't just not talk. People won't accept it and will keep prodding you and threatening you until you say something. So I used to skip school or indicate I lost my voice so people would not try to force me to talk. It worked pretty well, except that I couldn't communicate to anybody during those times, so I couldn't express my needs or wants. A couple of times I tried writing things down to communicate, but usually people didn't accept that at all and would just say, use your words. Use your words, you're not a baby. Babies can't write, but okay, I guess. And my mom also thought pointing was for babies, so I couldn't do that either. When I was in grade 9, I got my first computer, and I loved so much how easy it was to message somebody and not worry about stuttering or losing my words mid-sentence or trying to speak but having no noise come out. I got my first phone in grade 12 that I could use to text people, which was also awesome. But being able to text someone doesn't solve the problem of me wanting to communicate with people in the same room. So I still had times where I got really anxious or overwhelmed and could not speak and nobody knew what I wanted to say. But then I found out about AAC. At first I didn't think I was allowed to use it. I thought that you were only allowed to use it if you were physically incapable of any verbal speech. But then after learning more about it from people online and from my occupational therapist, I found out that there is no such rule. I am allowed to use AAC because it is open to anybody who needs it or benefits from it. There is no AAC police. Even non-disabled people could use it if they wanted. I mean, I don't think they want to, but nothing is stopping them. So now I use typing or my speech generation tablet with therapists, in some school meetings, with my family, or any time I am not able to communicate clearly verbally. It is not always perfect, but it is extremely helpful as compared to what I was like before. And I use it to narrate my YouTube videos because I get very nervous being on camera talking. Without AAC, I don't think I could have made most of my videos, or they would be way harder and more time consuming to make, and I would not want to.
Communicating online can be easier for many autistic people, as it enables users a greater locus of control over the way the social interaction takes place. Personally, one benefit I notice of communicating online is that I can control my volume, which I am not very good at doing when I'm talking in person. I frequently yell out at high volumes without meaning to or realizing that it was too loud, and if I'm communicating online, only I can hear my loud volumes. I asked my husband what benefits computer-mediated communication brings, and he said, it gives me time to think about what to say, and I worry about that a lot because sometimes in real life, I say something out loud and then I'm like, wow, that was cringe. And I can relate for sure. A lot of times for me, in academic or professional settings where I'm writing in more eloquent or prolific sentences, it's easier for me to communicate, but when it comes to casual face-to-face communication, like seeing somebody that you know and interacting with them briefly or just casually talking with anyone, I feel that I'm not as good. I feel that I don't understand exactly what I'm supposed to be doing or exactly what I'm doing wrong, but something's definitely off. I don't know. At least I do well in school. Another benefit is that you can interact with online communication at your own pace. if you're zoning out, if you're overstimulated, if you're having trouble processing what you're taking in, technology provides you with the opportunity to go back and rewatch or reread what was just said in a piece of digital media. I often wish real life had the same rewind feature because I think I miss out on a lot just by having my brain. This project, part of which you're watching right now, and part of which is a website, which you can go visit right after this, was completed using entirely digital means, which means I was able to do all of it, researching, writing the script, shooting and editing the footage, making the website, at my own pace, which was rather slow. I struggled a lot completing this project because I have task initiation issues, which is a subset of my executive function issues, which is a thing a lot of neurodivergent people experience problems with. The class I'm completing this project for is also conducted entirely online and asynchronously, which meant I never had to show up for class and feel secretly ashamed for not being productive enough by neurotypical standards. Doing things digitally means I get to do things on my own time, and I get to put some distance between myself and others, which can feel like a huge relief. This is why I only ever take online classes if I can help it. It lets me get my degree on my own terms, which I think are the only terms I'd be able to do school on and maintain some semblance of sanity. Many of the downsides of digital communication are ones that are true for many people, not just neurodivergent people. According to a study conducted by Anne E. Schlosser on how people portray themselves on social media, one hurdle to overcome in digital communication is reduced information richness. Schlosser writes, "Unlike face-to-face communication, online communication is less rich in the information conveyed because it often lacks nonverbal, visual, and auditory cues, such as facial expression and tone of voice." Reduced information richness can definitely be a bigger hurdle for neurodivergent people than for their neurotypical counterparts. Personally, a lot of times I don't understand how tone and pacing work in speech to accurately relay information, and it can be exponentially more challenging to get those aspects right when I'm writing online, or when I'm reading what someone else has written. I would argue, however, that reduced richness of information online is a challenge autistic people are already used to facing offline. For a lot of autistic people, it takes a great deal of concentrated focus and effort to either control your own facial expressions and tone or to interpret others' facial expressions and tone. This is not to say that it is impossible, because many autistic people do learn ways to manage and discern facial expressions and tone of voice, but some autistic brains do not have that wired in, so to speak. A lot of times, unfortunately, it can be less of a positive learning experience and more of a self-preservation necessity. A lot of times, trying to figure out how to do nonverbal communication the right way just turns into a way to mask. Another downside of digital communication for autistic people is the struggle of portraying yourself accurately in an online interaction. I touched on this already when discussing how hard it can be to get tone right with computer-mediated communication, but I want to bring it up as its own point because it's a big one. Essentially, it boils down to being misunderstood. A lot of autistic people already find it excruciatingly challenging to get social interactions right by neurotypical standards, and this challenge is doubled when communicating online. I am currently facing the challenge of portraying both myself and this information in the best way I can through this video, knowing that I will only be able to explain myself within the confines of this video, and that my words can be taken out of context, misconstrued, or misunderstood even within their intended context, and knowing that I cannot control the impact my words have after publishing this. It's daunting to me, to put it lightly, the pressure of coming across the way I want to in a public video over the internet. As a sub-point, what if a potential employer doesn't approve of what they find in your digital footprint? Communicating online in a way that is perceived as wrong by employers could harm an autistic person's career trajectory. Furthermore, there's the possibility of receiving negative, or more specifically hateful, comments on what you put out into the digital space. Beyond cyberbullying, though, what about harassment? What if you encounter a bigoted, ableist audience? There is a risk of being doxxed and stalked in person, or even injured or killed. The impacts of using digital means to communicate are as varied as autism is in each individual. That is to say, it depends on the person and their specific set of skills. And the context. I can't make a judgment as to whether digital communication is easier or harder for autistic people, because all of that depends on the person and how they're using computer-mediated communication. However, I hope that this video helped you learn more about neurodiversity and the intricate web of communication we all engage with on our own terms. If there's just one takeaway I wish to impart with this video, it is that neurodiversity is a natural and wonderful part of life, and there is not a right way to be a person. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the accompanying website I made for a list of all the sources I used and for a bunch more information that didn't make it into this video. Take care and be gentle with yourself. Remember, there's no wrong way to be you. That's a wrap. That's a wrap. I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna leave my phone. I just thought that'd be a good dramatic ending.